is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The world's biggest political gathering begins in Beijing. China sets its course for the coming years, with implications for the international community.
Our other headlines: the Czech Republic asks China to send its COVID vaccines as the EU's slow rollout continues to cause concern.
Ireland says the UK can't be trusted in post-Brexit talks as London changes the rules on Northern Ireland.
And why coronavirus has hit hardest in countries with the biggest obesity problems. China's biggest political event of the year, the Two Sessions, is underway in Beijing. The gathering debates the country's agenda for the coming years. China's top political advisory body, the CPPCC, started its session on Thursday. Its chairman, Wang Yang, called on members to implement China's 5-year plan.
Last year, the CPPCC emphasized work on pandemic control and prevention, as well as socio-economic development under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. We also focused on major livelihood matters and improved our system to work more efficiently. The CPPCC has actively supported the government in accomplishing its targets for the 13th five-year plan.
China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, will start convening on Friday. Well, our correspondent, Sui Huiao, is watching events in Beijing. Hello there. What should we be looking out for?
Hello there. Ahead of the opening session of the NPC, China's top legislature held a press conference tonight in which the spokesperson Zhang Yesui introduced the agenda of this year's session. Well, tomorrow is obviously going to be a big day because Premier Li Keqiang is going to deliver the government work report. That may unveil China's GDP target for 2021, if there will be one, as well as the new 5-year plan and the long-term goals through the year 2035. And in the coming days, the legislative body will deliberate on these plans, as well as items such as the budget report. But the biggest headline from tonight's presser is the NPC is going to review the draft decision on improving the electoral system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. We know last year China introduced the national security legislation for the region to counter foreign interference in Hong Kong, as well as those attempts to seek independence of Hong Kong. Now, this new drafted decision is introduced for a different purpose, that is to plug up the loopholes in the SAR's electoral system. That essentially is to make sure that it's going to be the patriots governing Hong Kong, which seems pretty intuitive, and that is also going to ensure the accurate implementation of the one country, two systems policy, according to Zhang Yesui. Meanwhile, he also touches upon China's development strategies. Last year, China announced this development pattern called dual circulation, which takes domestic development as the mainstay. Of course, that has triggered concerns on whether China is going to turn its back on globalization. And here is clarification on that from the spokesperson. Take a listen.
China's economy is deeply integrated with the world economy. Boosting domestic consumption will attract resources across the globe. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the China-EU Investment Agreement will boost economic globalization and regional integration. China will continue to open up, boost trade, facilitate investment, and create a favorable business environment for foreign companies.
Now, we know tomorrow the world will tune in to the opening session because Premier Li Keqiang is going to deliver the work report. It will be the pivotal event throughout the two sessions. For me, it will be particularly interesting to see whether China will set a growth target this year, since last year China did not set a target due to all kinds of uncertainty, especially caused by the pandemic, and yet its economy ended up bouncing back pretty strong. So what will this year be like? All eyes will be on Premier Li's message for the answer. That's all from me. Back to you.
We'll be listening out for those numbers. Cui Hao, thank you very much.
The Czech Republic is seeking to boost supplies of vaccines, asking China to send doses of its Sinopharm jab. It comes amid rapidly rising cases in Central Europe. Like other EU countries, the Czech Republic has been hampered by delays in deliveries from the 3 producers whose shots have been approved. Julia Chapman reports.
A spokesperson for the Czech president says China has agreed to fulfill a request to send vials of Sinopharm's vaccine against COVID-19. Neither party has revealed how many doses would be sent to the Czech Republic, but the country's health ministry says it won't endorse any jab that hasn't received approval from the European Medicines Agency. Amid rising cases across the region, the Czech Republic is currently one of the world's worst affected countries per capita. After weeks of declining numbers, Europe's cases are now on the rise again, a trend being driven by central and eastern parts of the continent. That has led a number of countries to circumvent European regulators and seek vaccines from Russia and China. Hungary was the first to start using Sputnik V and Sinopharm's jab, with Slovakia receiving doses from Russia this week. When asked if it was the right decision for these countries to press ahead with vaccine approval, a WHO spokesperson said the body had faith in national regulators.
Any country is sovereign in their own decision-making process for getting the vaccine in to provide the benefits of this vaccine to their own population. While this sovereign decision lies with the country, it's also extremely important that the national regulatory authority of any country reviews the information related to safety, efficacy, and quality of any vaccine that is being used.
The Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary have all tightened restrictions to curb the virus this week. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Budapest.
The leaders of Denmark and Austria have agreed to work with Israel on vaccine supply and production. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz flew to Tel Aviv on Thursday for talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Kurz has said the two countries can no longer rely on Brussels. The move has been criticised by EU partners who've called on Israel to give surplus jabs to Palestinians. Well, speaking at a press conference moments ago, Kurz said all forms of cooperation were essential.
Today we agreed on 2 issues. First, to set up a joint research and development foundation to support innovative projects. And second, we decided to jointly invest in production plants in Europe and Israel to enhance vaccine supply.
Germany has approved the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for patients over the age of 65, reversing a previous decision. The health ministry previously said it shouldn't be used for older groups because of insufficient data. Chancellor Angela Merkel has also laid out a plan for the easing of coronavirus restrictions. Natalie Carney reports.
Germany's health ministry has announced that the country's vaccination authority has approved the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine to those above the age of 65. On Wednesday evening, German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced that the government would support this decision.
The Vaccine Commission, whose recommendations we are happy to follow, will authorise AstraZeneca for older age groups, as the latest studies have shown evidence for this.
This latest move could help Germany speed up its vaccination campaign, which has been relatively slow in comparison to other European countries. At present, 5% of its population has been inoculated. Germany, along with all of Europe, has been dealing with lower than expected supply from the vaccine drug manufacturers, delaying its vaccination progress. However, more than 1.4 million doses of the AstraZeneca drug are available in the country, but much of that supply has been sitting on the shelf while the country focuses on vaccinating priority group number 1, residents and employees of nursing homes, people over 80, as well as frontline medical staff. The allowance for those above 65 to be immunized with AstraZeneca will therefore increase Germany's available and usable supply. Yet at the same time, authorities will also have to battle any reputational damage. Some Germans simply don't trust the AstraZeneca vaccine. Meanwhile, a pilot project designed to also help speed up the pace of vaccinations has begun in the German state of Brandenburg, where patients can now get the COVID-19 vaccine jab at their local doctor's office. It is hoped that by April, general practitioners and specialists will also carry out inoculations in addition to the vaccination centers currently being used. German authorities are also aiming to stretch the intervals between vaccination doses to offer as many people as possible their initial shot. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
Lufthansa share prices fell in early trading after it announced an $8.7 billion full-year loss. The group, which owns multiple European airlines, was optimistic about a return to travel in 2021, but restrictions are expected to remain in place for a while longer, threatening the airline's recovery. Ryan Thompson reports from Frankfurt.
There's new optimism in Germany now that Chancellor Angela Merkel has unveiled a clearer route out of lockdown. The reopening of shops, restaurants, and other cornerstones of normal life could be just weeks away. But there was no mention of travel to other countries. Hundreds of German aircraft sit idle and unused, nearly 1 year after the pandemic sent passenger numbers tumbling. Germany's largest airline conglomerate, Lufthansa Group, announcing Thursday an $8.10 billion loss.
We were hit by the pandemic more than any other industry, and Europe was hit even harder than other regions of the world. Our airlines were only able to welcome 36 million passengers on board.
Lufthansa's 2020 financial report is far from a pretty picture. On top of billions in losses, revenue down by more than half, passenger traffic only a quarter of the year before, and 20% of the workforce cut through layoffs and early retirement. That's despite a $10 billion bailout from the German government last June, which the airline group hesitantly accepted.
Our engagement at Lufthansa is a temporary one. When the company is back on its feet, the state will divest its stake, hopefully with a small profit.
As for when passengers will return to the skies, Lufthansa is betting on an upturn this summer.
But ticket sales don't appear to match that same optimism. Though many European travelers say they have the appetite to travel again, tough border restrictions are making many hesitant to put money down on a future holiday for fear of a cancellation.
Lufthansa says with enough demand, it could restore 70% of its usual flight schedule in just a few weeks' time. But with more progress to be made vaccinating and tackling new COVID-19 variants, many analysts believe that's a sky-high dream. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Staying in Germany, while the pandemic has hampered many businesses, 2020 was a good year for the German multinational Merck, which posted pre-tax earnings of more than $6 billion. Profits were boosted by demand for its biotech lab supplies. Earlier this week, the US announced Merck will help make Johnson & Johnson's single-shot COVID vaccine. The United States says it will suspend tariffs on UK goods, including single malt whiskies. The tariffs were imposed in retaliation for subsidies given to the European aircraft maker Airbus. The EU and the US are in an ongoing dispute about how they support their aviation industries. The UK has been lobbying Washington to drop the tariffs. Amazon has opened its first till-less shop outside the United States. At the new Amazon Fresh store in London, shoppers can simply walk out with their groceries and are automatically billed. Campaigners have raised privacy concerns about the store, which uses hundreds of cameras and depth sensors. But others say it's a landmark moment for the sector. The Japanese carmaker Honda has announced it will sell a limited number of self-driving cars. The cars will be Level 3 automation versions of its flagship Legend vehicle. The car can take over all driving functions, but still requires human oversight. It marks a significant step forward in Honda's goal of becoming the first company to mass-produce automated vehicles. Elon Musk's SpaceX craft has exploded on landing for the third time. What was initially its first upright landing success ended in a fireball. The prototype did, though, successfully execute its in-flight maneuvers and managed to make a reasonably soft landing. The plan is for SpaceX to eventually fly passengers to Mars and the Moon.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. An encore or the final curtain? Will the government's budget promises save the UK theatre industry?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Ireland's foreign minister says Britain can't be trusted in post-Brexit talks following a dispute over the Northern Ireland border. It comes after the UK said it would unilaterally extend a grace period on Irish sea border checks, a move that sparked outrage from the EU. Now, loyalist paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland have withdrawn their support for a decades-old peace deal in protest. Tony Waterman reports.
The hand of history is at last lifting the burden of terror and violence.
When the Good Friday Agreement was struck in 1998, it brought decades of bloody violence to an end. The removal of heavily fortified army barracks and watchtowers along the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland proved crucial to maintaining peace for decades. In a letter to the British and Irish governments, loyalist paramilitary groups said they were temporarily withdrawing support for the peace accord, citing concerns over the disruption of trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
It is very concerning also that people who supported the Belfast Agreement have now decided that they can no longer do that because of the protocol, and they now feel that the balance in the Belfast Agreement has gone.
The Brexit deal keeps Belfast in the EU customs union to avoid a hard border with Ireland, a potential flashpoint for violence. But that means goods coming from Britain are now subject to customs checks, which has caused supply issues since the trade deal came into effect in January.
It's a pretty sensitive time in Northern Ireland, and it needs pretty sensitive handling, which it isn't necessarily getting.
The warning came just hours after the EU accused the UK of breaching the Brexit agreement for a second time, after it unilaterally extended grace periods on a range of customs checks, including on food. Brussels is now looking at its legal options. The UK has justified the move, saying supermarkets and suppliers need more time to adjust to the post-Brexit rules.
I attended the joint committee last week with the European Commission, and there was absolutely no sign of them extending the grace periods that was going to cause untold damage, if you like, to Northern Ireland.
It's a further deterioration in relations after Brussels temporarily triggered an override clause in the Brexit deal in January as part of new export controls on COVID-19 vaccine exports. It sparked outrage in London, Belfast and Dublin, who weren't notified beforehand.
Well, in a moment we'll get reaction from Nuwid Jabarkil, our correspondent in Westminster. First, let's return to Tony Waterman in Brussels. Tony, with all of this distrust, where does the EU go from here?
Well, one of the first things that Brussels is doing, Jamie, is looking into its legal options, which perhaps is not the best way to lower the temperature in the room, but is exactly what they did this past fall when, in a very similar move, the Johnson administration tabled legislation which would have overridden parts of the Brexit deal when it came to moving goods from Britain to Northern Ireland. This was the first breach of the agreement, but both sides saying that they are going to remain in touch in the coming days, so we do expect there to be conversations taking place. But a lot of the pressure that is going to be heaved on the UK government is going to happen behind the scenes, and that, I'm sure, is already taking place. But the experts that I was speaking to today about this saying that this could actually be a sign of things to come. You could call it the Frost effect, if you like. Lord David Frost, the former chief negotiator of the Brexit agreement turned cabinet minister, who just took over from Michael Gove, who was the person in charge of this EU-UK post-Brexit relationship. He just came into this post, and here we are a couple of days later, and we are facing this unilateral move when it comes to extending these waivers, this grace period. Frost is really known as somebody who is more aggressive and assertive in his diplomacy style, and this could just be setting things up. He thinks really that the EU needs more of a stick than a carrot approach, and this is why some people are concerned that this is going to set a very dangerous precedent, and is part of the reason why today the European Parliament decided to postpone a vote to ratify the post-Brexit trade deal. That could now be pushed back into the end of April as they take a look and try to see, A, if things are going to calm down, and B, if the UK is going to stick to its side of the agreement.
Tony Waterman with a perspective from Brussels. Thank you very much.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Nuwid Jabarkil, now. Nuwid, the loyalist paramilitaries have made their position clear. What's the reaction been from Westminster?
Yeah, this letter to the Prime Minister from the Loyalist Communities Council, essentially it comes down to a much more fundamental problem rather than this extension to October. It comes down to the fact that they're not happy with the Northern Ireland Protocol. That was part of the Brexit deal, and essentially it treats Northern Ireland differently to the rest of the United Kingdom. That's England, Wales and Scotland. It means that goods going into Northern Ireland will have to have the same sorts of checks as anywhere else in the European Union. Now, as unionist groups, they want closer ties to the rest of the United Kingdom, and that's why they're unhappy with this, and that's why they've temporarily pulled their support for the deal. In terms of where Westminster stands, Boris Johnson's government, they say that this was really an operational decision. The goods going into Northern Ireland have had to have more checks on them. It's led to delays at ports, and the reason they've moved these checks further down, unilaterally taken the decision, was for operational reasons, to prevent those sorts of issues at the border. And Boris Johnson himself spoke a little while earlier. The bigger concern is what impact could this have for the delicate peace deal there, and he said, as far as his government's concerned, there was no question about where their priorities lie when it comes to the Good Friday Agreement. Have a listen.
We're taking some temporary and technical measures to ensure that there are no barriers in the Irish Sea, or to make sure that things flow freely from GB to NI, and that's what you'd expect. But obviously, these are matters for continuing intensive discussions with our friends, and we'll continue to do that. I'm sure that with a bit of goodwill and common sense, that all these technical problems are eminently soluble.
Well, Nuwid, you talk about this delicate peace deal, and nobody wants to return to what was called the Troubles, that violence which dominated Northern Ireland and the UK mainland for a generation.
Yeah, just to give a sense for our viewers of what this all means, the Good Friday Agreements, which was struck in 1998, brought to an end around 3 decades of conflict between two mainly unionist Protestant groups who wanted closer ties with the United Kingdom, and mainly Catholic Republicans who wanted closer ties with the Republic of Ireland. That's why this is so sensitive, and really it was the sorts of conflict that impacted lots of people's ordinary lives. It was low-intensity conflict, things like sniper attacks or car bombings, sensationalist bombings, not just in Northern Ireland, but here in the United Kingdom as well. That was brought to an end with a peace deal in 1998, which involved not just the two groups in Northern Ireland, but also the British government and the Irish government, as well as the United States. Bill Clinton, the former president, played a crucial role in bringing all the sides together. And one key thing here is this Loyalist Communities Council pulling their support for that deal. In reality, in practical terms, it may not mean too much, seeing as they're not the main power players in Northern Ireland, but it does signal a wider issue for where this goes from here. And the new president in the United States, Joe Biden, has already said that if there's any threat to that peace deal, the Good Friday Agreement, then the UK, Westminster, could give up any hopes of striking a new trade deal with the United States. So there is a global importance to all of this, not just between the UK and Ireland and Northern Ireland. Juliet.
It's global and it's complex. Nuid Jabakil, thank you very much. It's a question of sex, an age-old wrong which the EU wants to put right. On average, across Europe, a woman earns 15% less than a man per hour, but levels of disparity depend on where you live. Despite having a female head of state for 15 years, German women can earn, on average, 20% less than men. The disparity is highest in Estonia, while in Romania there's only a 2% difference. Although smaller pay gaps between genders are more likely in countries with a low female employment rate. So where are women winning the wage war? Well, outside the EU, Iceland could show the way forward. It shrunk its gender pay gap by 88% in a decade, and that's by getting tough. Companies are fined if they don't pay equally, and workers of both sexes get equal parental leave, so having children doesn't necessarily curtail a career. So with International Women's Day rapidly approaching, the EU is taking action and proposing a directive to improve pay transparency.
It builds on a very simple idea. Equal work deserves equal pay. And for equal pay, you need transparency. Women must know whether their employers treat them fairly. And when this is not the case, they must have the power to fight back and get what they deserve.
The UK Finance Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced $7 billion in grants for struggling businesses in Wednesday's budget, his finance statement. But is it enough? Our correspondent Nicole Johnston talked to the family who run the Old Red Lion Theatre and Pub in London.
A 600-year-old London theatre pub like the Old Red Lion has seen a lot of tough times. But never before has the bar been empty and the theatre dark for so long. Mary Devine, one of the members of this family-run business, doesn't know how it will come back to life.
I think because we're a family business, it's very personal. It's not like this is just, it is a livelihood, but it's, you know, I've grown up here, this is a family hub, and it's really important for us to survive, and it's been definitely a roller coaster, so up and down with stop-start, and how we have no idea whether we're going to come out of it okay.
But her father says there's enough in the budget that they should be able to survive.
We've basically got enough to get ourselves open. Then the challenge will be into what kind of trading environment do we open into, because that's a complete unknown. I mean, no one can tell us that. You know, will people want to come back to the theatre?
Cinderella is beginning to take shape.
That's the million-dollar question. Hit musical composer Andrew Lloyd Webber is convinced the answer is yes. He's preparing to open his latest show, Cinderella, in London. Rehearsals have started under lockdown.
For this to be one of the first shows that will be starting back up and I'll be playing the lead, I'm going to be a mess. I genuinely don't know how I'm going to get through it.
The government is giving another $420 million to the arts and culture industry, and over $100 million for museums. If the plan to reopen the economy by the 21st of June actually happens, then the arts industry expects people will be back in the theatre soon afterwards.
You know, we'll start to see producers and theatres invest into the big shows, into the major things that tour all over this country, and hopefully we'll see those back on stage as soon as we can. Probably the vast majority from the autumn onwards, but some before that, which will be fantastic. But, you know, we need more certainty.
And in the time of this pandemic, certainty is hard to come by. But with everyone confined to their houses, many people are desperate for live performances to come back. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Major oil-producing nations are discussing whether to increase production now the price of crude is rebounding. OPEC nations and their allies, including Russia, are meeting now. Some have called for caution, though, on raising output too soon. Well, Jacob Greaves is in Dubai. Thanks for joining us, Jacob. Who's the one to watch in this meeting?
Well, it all really comes down to two key players, Saudi Arabia and Russia. What, if anything, they agree will likely determine whether OPEC Plus will ease off on production cuts that help stabilise prices amid the impact of the pandemic, and if so, by how much. Now, going into this meeting, Saudi Arabia's energy minister urged caution and vigilance, and that's where the potential for disagreement here lies. Saudi Arabia, OPEC's biggest oil producer, has taken a cautious approach to easing cuts since they were introduced last year, fearing the fall in prices that might come if demand hasn't returned to the market. In fact, Riyadh has been voluntarily reducing its output by an extra 1 million barrels per day, alongside what's agreed with OPEC Plus members. Based on Reuters sourcing, Saudi Arabia has told those in attendance they're considering extending that into April. Now, competing against this thinking, you have the group's other major producer, Russia. Moscow has been more open in pushing for a boost to production, fearing they might lose market share if there's a return in supply of US shale. And we're hearing now, according to a Reuters source, that Russia has told those meeting at the moment they would like to raise oil output in April to cover a deficit in the local fuel market.
It's tricky, isn't it, Jacob, because demand is still very fragile. I mean, I'm thinking, last April, oil prices went negative. Yes, they've bounced back, but it's still very, very fragile. Give us the market backdrop.
Sure, well, I mean, exactly. But despite that, Brent crude prices have risen $2 a barrel today, buoyed by that sentiment from Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, we're seeing US crude just hit its highest in over a year. In general, like I said, the markets have seen a 4-month price rally, with oil at times even topping pre-pandemic levels. But analysts and traders have warned that the price recovery isn't really reflected in a demand recovery, and that actual sales aren't expected to match supply until later in 2021. OPEC Plus cut a record 9.7 million barrels per day last year when demand collapsed because of the pandemic. Since March, that has been reduced to around 7 million barrels per day. Some analysts have suggested this meeting could see a further 500 million barrels per day added to the market, but that's going to depend very much on the discussions ongoing now and whether this group can find consensus in a far from certain demand outlook with continued restrictions and lockdowns around the world.
Big questions too about where you're going to store all that if they keep producing it. I'm Jacob Greaves. Thanks very much.
Football clubs playing with an unfair advantage. That's what EU lawyers have been arguing about. FC Barcelona is among 4 football clubs in Spain which will have to pay $6 million after losing a bid to overturn a claim that it received unfair state aid. Rahul Pathak reports.
So the European Court of Justice has upheld an appeal in the case that saw Brussels take on some of football's biggest clubs, and which goes all the way back to 1990. Now, the European Commission claimed that the Spanish government had given illegal state aid to 4 Spanish clubs: Barcelona, Real Madrid, Osasuna and Athletic Bilbao. Now, they were treated as non-profit organisations and so paid 5% lower in tax than their rivals over a period of 20 years. Now, Barcelona, plus the 3 other clubs, will now have to pay back a hefty lump sum. The court says it will be limited to $6 million per club, and it says the precise amount should be fixed by Spanish authorities. It's certainly been a week to forget for the Catalans.
I think it's the worst moment in club's history. One of the slogan of the club of Barcelona is Más que un club, is just more than a club. And now they are more than a club, they are a criminal organization. When do we see a former president of a club going to jail? It's something that it's really a shame. It's a stain to the Spanish football.
Well, central to the case is Josep Maria Bartomeu. The ex-president allegedly oversaw the misuse of club funds by spending millions through a social media company to write damaging stories against opposition figures. Well, Bartomeu was forced to resign 6 months ago, leaving the club nearly $1 billion in debt. Well, Barcelona had organised an internal commission to investigate, but the police stepped in this week to make arrests, deciding that they could not be trusted. Now, the club will hope to turn a new page this weekend with fresh presidential elections, but this current crisis looks set to run for some time yet. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China will unveil its growth targets for 2021. What does it mean for Europe?
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, repeat loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, God.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The Czech Republic asks China to send its COVID vaccine as the EU's slow rollout continues to cause concern.
Our other headlines, Ireland says the UK can't be trusted in post-Brexit talks as London changes the rules on Northern Ireland.
And the world's biggest political gathering begins in Beijing. China sets its course for the coming years with implications for the international community.
China will unveil its growth target for the year on Friday. It will be watched closely across the rest of the world. The government will also present details of the development plans for the next 5 years. The National People's Congress has nearly 3,000 members, known as deputies. They're elected from all regions of the country. Most of them have separate careers. They're farmers, migrant workers, teachers and doctors. And inevitably, of course, there are even celebrities like a veteran diplomat, the president of the tech giant Tencent, and a volleyball Olympic champion. Now, over the decades, the proportion of female lawmakers has been rising. In the 1950s, that figure was only 12%. Today, 1 in 4 deputies are women. That's above the Asian average and inching closer to the European average. Ethnic minorities occupy nearly 15% of the seats, much higher than their ratio in the general population. It's a legal requirement that every group is represented, no matter how small. The Lu Ba ethnic minority group in Tibet has a population of just over 3,000 people, and they have 1 deputy.
China's future direction as the world's second largest economy has implications for the wider international community. China's investment deal with the EU is seen as mutually beneficial for economic recovery from the pandemic. That's according to China's ambassador to the EU. He spoke to our reporter, Andrew Wilson.
As two sessions gets underway, the economic headline has to be China's recently agreed investment deal with the European Union. Beijing says EU FDI to China last year was $5.7 billion, and return investment was in the region of $14.7 billion. China's representative in Europe pressed the idea of joint recovery.
As the world is struggling to contain the virus, it's important for China and the EU to maintain smooth flows of goods, normal operation of investment projects, and a secure and stable supply chains, which is crucial for economic recovery.
Multilateralism is the watchword for 2021, and that's reflected in calls from a new US administration for closer ties and alliances with Europe.
The development of EU-US relations should not affect the normal development of China-EU relations, still less at the expense of China-EU relations. Hopefully, the EU will act in this spirit and continue to approach its relations with the major countries in a broad context, contribute to the growth of China-EU comprehensive strategic partnership and global stability and prosperity.
Regarding the pandemic, one EU country has already taken a vaccine from China, and there's been talk of vaccine nationalism. China says it agrees, and that cooperation is the only way to combat the pandemic.
Our efforts are only as strong as the weakest link. While meeting a huge domestic demand for vaccines, China is also doing its best to support other countries, including some European countries. This is a concrete action of China to deliver on its commitment to making vaccines a global public good. In COVID-19 response, people and life always come first. Vaccination is a very useful tool to stop the virus, not a geopolitical instrument.
On Brexit, it's clear that Beijing sees that as a work still in progress. The EU ambassador was straightforward.
This is between the UK and the EU. China will not interfere or comment.
The UK-China relationship clearly has its own path to follow. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, London.
Well, the unveiling of China's growth target will have a far-reaching effect here in Europe as economic ties between the two sides grow despite the pandemic. CGTN's Paul Barber spoke to Jörg Wuttke, the president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, and Isabel Hilson, CEO of China Dialogue, and asked them what they expected.
Well, I have been here more than 30 years, so I have my fair share of five-year plan experience. It is always the aim of becoming a more rule-based society. Again, I guess at the end of 5 years, we will have again the situation where we say it could have been more, but it's baby steps. It's moving in the right direction. In the chamber, we can always come up with recommendations and improvement areas. Last year, September, was 430 pages, 900 cases. It shows two things. One is how much still has to be done, and B, how much interest European business has in order to get things done.
And Isabel, how much of an opportunity is there for cooperation on renewable energy and tackling climate change between China and the EU?
Well, I think across the spectrum of, you mentioned renewable technologies, yes, both are interested, for example, in developing a hydrogen economy. They're both leaders in solar and wind. There is a whole range of other possible areas of cooperation, including water technologies, for example. China is extremely scarce of water, needs to manage its water better. Europe can help. And I think an alignment of ambition on things like circular economy, on things like driven by the European Green Deal, on the taxonomy of what investments consider green. There's really quite a spectrum of possibilities here.
Jörg, the headwinds to global trade have been really significant over the past year, but we have seen an increase in imports and exports between China and the EU. Do you see competition as well as cooperation increasing between the two sides this year?
Well, first of all, it's €1 billion a day coming from China into the European Union and €500 million a day going from Europe into China. So apparently customers and people like each other's products. But of course, there's far more potential. I mean, still the European Union companies export to the US twice as much as they do to China. So that shows the potential of the Chinese market if they would open up further. There's lots of headwinds. It's mostly of political nature. The deglobalization forces were covered in a recent decoupling report by the European Chamber, and we're clearly worried about this kind of technology war, which is coming up between the US and China. That would be really the unknown, big unknown, distorting the market between Europe and China.
Isabel, what's your take on that, and how do you think challenges to the trade relationship could be better managed?
Well, I agree with Jörg. There are a lot of headwinds, and I think that we can anticipate that they're not going to get any easier, certainly in the next couple of years. I think there is a strategic competition between the US and China, and it's going to be quite tricky for the EU to navigate its way through. You know, the EU itself has also emphasized a strategic autonomy. There are problems with the China relationship which are to do with a certain hardening of public and political attitudes towards China in the past year. So I think that for us to make progress, we need very actively to look at those areas of cooperation that do work, for example, on biodiversity and climate change, which can keep a constructive conversation going as we move forward into the post-COVID world.
Mm-hmm. And if I could ask you both what else you'll be looking closely for at this year's two sessions, Jörg?
Well, for us here in China, we of course look at the plan. China has a plan, and you sometimes wonder if Europe has a plan. We're looking at dual circulation, meaning the emphasis of China of being very self-sufficient to a large extent. That worries us. At the same time, it gives us business opportunities where China opens up areas that used to be closed. And of course, I guess that the 45-year plan should not be underestimated. Again, China has a plan. It should be a wake-up call for Europe because China's not going to wait.
Isabel?
Last September, President Xi made a very important announcement at the UN of China's ambition to become carbon neutral by 2060. That's great. Getting there, however, and how you get there, how quickly you get there is what matters. So in this critical 5-year plan, we will be looking at signs of greater ambition for China's energy transformation. We will be looking at concrete steps to 2030, which is an absolutely critical period. If China is to achieve its 2060 goal, we need to see very, very important signs now, for example, on coal, for example, on green finance, for example, on how to ramp up renewables fast enough and comprehensively enough to meet those targets. And that will be really exciting if we can see those signs.
Police in Myanmar have again used tear gas and gunfire to break up protests. This comes after 38 people were killed on Wednesday in demonstrations against the military takeover just over a month ago. Gao Jiayi reports now from Yangon.
On Thursday, demonstrators in major cities across Myanmar returned to the streets to protest against police violence. This comes after the United Nations said 38 people has been killed on Wednesday, the bloodiest day since the military takeover last month. Protesters in Yangon have been using tires, trash cans and stones to set up makeshift roadblocks to slow down the police. Most of them are in helmets, face masks and other protective gear during the confrontation with security forces. Violence has escalated in Yangon in recent days. There were clashes on Thursday where police used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. At some road junctions, some people stopped to pay tribute to victims of the violence. They are condemning the Myanmar police and military for opening fire on civilians and violating international law. On social media, some people posted pictures of the fighter jets over the city of Mandalay. Gao Jiayi for CGTN in Yangon.
Brazil's second biggest city, Rio de Janeiro, is the latest in the country to adopt new COVID-related restrictions, including a curfew, in a bid to slow a deadly second wave. All restaurants will close from 5 p.m. and some businesses, like clubs, will have to shut altogether. It comes as Brazil registered a record 1,910 deaths from the virus on Wednesday. Former French Prime Minister Edouard Balladur has been cleared of corruption over arms sales to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. But his former Defence Minister, François Lyotard, was found guilty. Both were accused of funneling cash to fund Balladur's presidential campaign in the mid-1990s. The verdict comes after former President Sarkozy received a jail term for corruption. The Duchess of Sussex is said to be saddened by reports of a bullying complaint during her time as a working royal, according to her spokesman. The Times newspaper reports that Meghan drove 2 personal assistants out of the household. In an interview by Oprah Winfrey with Harry and Meghan, aired in the US on Sunday and in the UK on Monday. Britain's Prince Philip has undergone a successful procedure for a pre-existing heart condition. The 99-year-old husband of Queen Elizabeth has spent 16 nights in hospital. The palace says the prince will remain there for several more days.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why coronavirus has hit hardest in countries struggling with obesity.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. There's a clear link between obesity and high coronavirus death rates. That's according to a new study. The World Obesity Foundation says death rates are almost always 10 times as great in countries where at least half the population is overweight. I asked Olivia Calancanti, the Director of Science and Programs at the World Obesity Foundation, to explain more.
In a way, it's not completely surprising to us because people with obesity are more vulnerable to respiratory illnesses. We have seen this with H1N1, with MERS, and people with obesity are more vulnerable to influenza.
What do you think governments around the world should do next, now that we know about this link between coronavirus and obesity?
We want governments to take a holistic approach and to adopt the ROOTS framework, which is recognize obesity as a disease, ensure obesity monitoring, obesity prevention, treatment for obesity, and a systems-based approach. That means that because obesity is such a complex problem, we need a coordinated solution that tackles it in all fronts. Just telling people to eat less and move more is not enough. It won't cut it.
Well, tell us more about that. I mean, as you know, the world's been bombarded with those messages for a generation. As you say, it doesn't work. The world is getting fatter. So we need blunter messaging, don't we? We need taxation on sugar in every country, for example.
We need different actions. So from a policy perspective, yes, we have seen that taxation on sugar-sweetened beverages work. We've seen this in Mexico, in Chile. From an overall perspective, we also need better and more specialized healthcare. We need doctors that know how to treat obesity. In most medical schools around the world, medical students don't even study obesity. And we need for people to understand that, again, this is not the product of lack of self-discipline or willpower. This is a disease. Obesity is a multifactorial, complex, and chronic disease, meaning that whoever suffers from it will suffer from their whole lives. Only by truly understanding this, we're going to be able to have healthcare that don't have stigma or preconceived notions about it, so they can help their patients. We can have media that, doesn't feed us this narrative, again, about personal responsibility. And we can have political action and regulation around food.
It's fashionable, though, isn't it, to blame governments and say this is the responsibility of big governments. Governments need to intervene and tell people how to live their lives. In the UK, there's the phrase, the nanny state. There is a responsibility on the individual to take personal responsibility, isn't there?
So I would say that in the obesity space, we actually see the opposite. The narrative really is about personal responsibility. If you look at the media, if you look at articles, images, the words that have been used, people truly believe that it's just because people don't want to get skinnier. They don't want to lose the weight, or they're too lazy. In terms of government action, we live in a society and we are exposed to a certain number of things. And if we live in an obesogenic environment, it is the onus of the government to make sure that citizens are protected and they have access to healthy, affordable food. They have access to affordable health care. It has to be a joint effort.
Reminder of our headlines. The world's biggest political gathering begins in Beijing. China sets its course for the coming years with implications for the international community.
Our other headlines: the Czech Republic asks China to send its COVID vaccine as the EU's slow rollout continues to cause concern.
And Ireland says the UK can't be trusted in post-Brexit talks as London changes the rules on Northern Ireland.
And that's just about it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.